Not only is Marcia Norman one of our most distinguished and important playwrights, and highly praised and awarded for plays such as Getting Out and Night Mother, and musicals such as The Secret Garden and The Color Purple, she is one of our country's most impassioned and committed advocates of young artists, and in particularly emerging playwrights. As I said earlier in an introduction today to a whole other group of people, Marcia distinguishes herself as probably one of the most important thinkers in the American theater as well, informing issues of playwrights' rights, the role of the critic in the American theater, and the decline of significant opportunities for women in the American theater with her keen insight and profound wisdom. A winner of the Drama Desk, the Susan Blackburn Prize in Playwriting, a Tony Award, and the Pulitzer Prize in Drama for her play, Night Mother. Would you please welcome to the Kennedy Center and to the Dramatists Guild, Marcia Norman. I think one of the questions that I know that I've had recently, this happened the other day when I was in an elementary school, and a young kid asked me what a playwright was. And when you're trying to explain that to a 7 or an 8-year-old, you know, it's a different definition than if we're talking to adults. So I'm curious how you would define that in the most simple terms for someone who doesn't know what a playwright is.
Okay, that's the easy question. A playwright is a person who has a story to tell to a live audience, right? A person who wants to sit across the table, across the stage, and tell about what happened to somebody that was looking for something one day. Do you know, it's that a playwright is a person who writes a story to be told out loud through actors. And I think that the out loud to a living person part is what makes the difference between a short story writer or a novelist or, a poet. I mean, those things can all be appreciated from the page. But a playwright is a person that writes for a living human to convey a living story to some living audience. And I think that's the real thing. As a kid, I was that 8-year-old across the supper table from a master storyteller who was my grandfather, who grew up in New Mexico. And he was the kind of goody-goody in a bunch of sort of bad old rancher brothers, So
Right.
he spent the rest of his life telling the story about how bad the brothers were to him. But I would always list those stories. Hearing living stories from living people is really the heart of the theater. And those stories get carried on and passed along over the centuries, really, so that what you do as a playwright is end up saying to the people who come after you what it has felt like to be alive in your time.
Well, being a storyteller probably hasn't changed in that definition, but I'm curious if you think, since you started writing, has how we tell those stories changed in the theater, and who we're telling them to? Has that changed? And what they're willing to listen to, has that changed?
Well, I think that's all changed. It's like, and when people could ride on the train, it changed how they felt about horses. And when people had horses, it changed how they felt about walking. You know what I mean? There are different pleasures to the different forms of storytelling. And I think that what you need to do as a storyteller is to decide which of the many forms you have to choose from is the one that you need for this particular story. And I think that that's the crucial thing. I mean, there are sometimes when you just want to be on the train. You want a long, quiet, peaceful. And there's sometimes when you'd like to be on a horse, right? Do you know what I mean? That's deciding which is the best form for the content that you have is the crucial thing about being a storyteller. You can't go and tell a kind of peaceful pastoral tale on the stage now because we want to read that a chapter at a time at night before we go to bed. What we want in the theater now is what only the theater can do, which is, a story that takes advantage of the conventions of the theater, that uses the tricks, the smoke, the mirrors. You want the magic act, which you have to see to believe. I think that there's something about the liveness of the theater that isn't. Nobody else competes with us for that. The movies, we know it's in the can. You can come see it tomorrow. It'll be the same. Television, that's its own kind of wonder, right? And so are books of photographs, and so are books of short stories. But the theater is something that requires an audience to be there before it can happen. And when it happens, you don't know how it will turn out. It could be that tonight is the night that the actor falls off the stage. Do you know what I mean? That's part of what is thrilling about the theater. I think our challenge as storytellers for the theater is to use the tools that only we can use, and use those to the best of our ability. Don't try to do what TV does. Don't try to do, what anybody else can do. Just do our tricks. You don't want to see a great trapeze artist walking the balance beam. You want to see him on the trapeze. You want to see him fly, right? And I think that's the sort of idea about the modern world of the theater. There are lots of ways to tell stories now. Blogs, I mean, endless phone calls, right? Endless ways to tell stories, cartoons, you name it. But what can we do that only we can do? I mean, I feel like so far nobody's figured out how to do musicals except the theater. And I think there are some other kinds of storytelling that are best done in the theater. I think that the theater is a wonderful place to tell stories about one person up against it. And I think that that's one of our strengths. When you tell the story about, okay, here's Hamlet. He has a problem. He has to avenge the death of his father, and to do that, he will kill everybody on the stage. But that's Hamlet, right? And so that works best in the theater when you see that one person, and you in the darkness of the theater can respond as if you were Hamlet, right? To that story of that person on that path. And I think it's harder to do in film, although they do it. I mean, we can focus in the theater in the way that the other forms can't. And we have in the theater keep going back to the liveness. We have this vibrations that go out from human bodies. You sit there and film, and your eyes may water, but very rarely do you feel it here on your chest, about what's coming to you from an actor, what's coming from a singer. When you're in a piece of wonderful theater, your whole body responds to what's on the stage. And I think that's a thing that we know how to make that. We're doing that on purpose to get to you. But that's our treasure.
So I'm curious then about, this is a hard question, I understand, but what do we have a responsibility as dramatists? And if so, what is it to the culture or to our society? Or what do you think it is?
Well, I don't think we have a responsibility as dramatists. I think we have a responsibility as human beings to take responsible action in our lives. And if we are artists, then that action takes the form of art. If we're engineers, then we build responsible buildings. If we're, do you know what I mean? We take the action that we can take while we are here. And if we get these gifts of language, we use them. So I think that to say, here are the things that are troubling us, however it is we can do that, we should. If we are dramatists, then our drama will, just of necessity and out of just naturalness, deal with that. I think that I think that it's okay if we feel the need to entertain each other. I think that's heaven. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's also heaven if we feel the need to address significant social issues or issues of intimacy or violence or whatever it is that happens to come to us. I mean, I feel that we as writers we do valuable work in the tribe. Our work is not going out and planting the seeds and harvesting the corn and cutting down the forest and taming the animals and whatever else the work is of the tribe. Our work is at the end of the night when the supper's been eaten and the fire's gone down, our work is to stand and say the stories of the tribe, say who we are and what we're doing here and how we began and how we came to this place and what it is that, how we make of this world a home, as Arthur Miller said. That's his line, but that's right. I mean, that's what we as writers do. It's not a casual activity. It's not like, oh, this is the life where we get to just kind of goof around and write. That's not it at all. This is the life where you need to record what you see and you need to pass it along to the people who come after you. And I think that I hope that the people who come after us look at all these forms, look at the newspaper, look at the films, look at the plays, and say, well, that's who they were. I mean, I think that it's a question that every writer has to ask, which is which stories am I going to tell, given the fact that I have a limited amount of time to work? And the answer is, you need to tell the stories that only you can tell. Tell the story that won't be told if you don't tell it. Tell the story that's you looking through the keyhole at a part of life that you know. We don't want you to tell the stories that 17 other people know. We want your specific one, the secret one that's given to you. And if, as is the case with a lot of great writers, if it's a story that you feel you have to tell again and again, that's what you do. You're Hemingway, you get your assigned story, you tell that story. And you keep telling it because you don't know whether it's going to be heard or not. You know, you're Tennessee Williams, you keep telling that story. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of writers feel that they have to kind of branch out. You know, they have to, if they have written a very serious kind of tragedy, they feel like, well, maybe their next couple of plays should be comedies. They should try something else. Well, you know, the world doesn't want those plays. Turns out, it's everybody has something to offer to the memory. You know, and I think that's the audience decides what's going to be remembered, but it's our job to sort of submit for memory by the species these characters, these moments in the lives we've lived.
I think I just want to interrupt and say I think you can understand why I said in my introduction she's one of the smartest people I know. I could just listen to that for the next 2 hours or so.
My life has certainly changed in the last 20 years. I know yours has.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you that question about how has theater changed in the last 20 years, although we could spend hours on that. But I will ask how your process of writing has changed over the last 20 years, say.
Yeah.
Or has it? Maybe it hasn't.
Well, no, it actually has. It's when I first began, I was given this great piece of advice, which I give to all of you, which is that you should write about something that terrifies you. Think of the thing that is the most frightening to you in the world and write about that. This great advice was given to me by John Jory, and he said, think back at least 10 years to a time when you were really scared and write about that, if you're looking for subject. And that was such great advice for a young writer. And so I wrote Getting Out, which was for me about the terror that I felt on encountering this young woman at a state mental hospital who was so frightening that we were always just really glad when she ran away. Like, oh, okay, good. A couple of days of safety from this girl. And then Night Mother, of course, is another thing that is a story of terror for me. You know, what happens if I get to that place of wanting to die and nobody knows me well enough to save me. And that turned out to be really great advice for a young writer. Now I feel, not being a young writer anymore, I find that I'm looking more for questions of how is it that that person survived what happened to them? You know, I'm no longer, maybe I'm asking a question of, you know, what frightens me the most is not surviving, but good luck with that. But I'm looking now at different things for the subject matter. You know, I'm looking at real stories of survival and real stories of endurance. I'm increasingly drawn to extreme sports and stories of survival in the wild, as everybody knows who was in class this morning. And I think that you know, more and more life seems to me like a very dangerous place. And so what I'm looking for is how it is that someone survived what happened to them.
You started in music. You grew up.
I did.
In a family of music, or studying the piano. I think.
I did.
Correct.
I did.
Right. And then, so it should be no surprise to us that you went into musical theater.
Right.
And yet it's a surprise to us that you went into musical theater.
I know.
Yeah. How did that happen?
I actually, when I first said to myself, okay, I'm going to quit work and I'm going to find out whether I can be a writer or not, which was a moment you know, sort of mid-20s, I thought, you know what, I'm going to have to know whether I can be a writer or not. It's okay if they tell me no, but I'm going to have to find out if I can do it. I've always thought that's what I wanted, but my family wasn't a writing family. Kentucky at the time didn't have any playwrights who came from there. I thought, I don't know, women can't write for the theater. I don't know. Who was alive? Lillian Hellman? Is that? I don't know. So I'll have to do something else. And I ended up working for the State Arts Council and was well on my way to the National Endowment. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I want to see if I can be a writer. And so I worked 3 jobs one year and gathered up enough money to quit work. And so on day one of I don't have to work at the Arts Commission, what I sat down to write was a musical. And it took me about 3 months of writing a musical by myself in Louisville, Kentucky, to realize that you can't do that. Can't write a musical by yourself. You can write a play by yourself, though. So that's what I did, right? I thought, okay, I can't get to Broadway with a musical from Louisville, Kentucky, but I can get to Actors Theater of Louisville with a play, you know, from Louisville, Kentucky. And that's what I did. And then my sort of reputation got out ahead of me, right? Basically, then I was a serious, tragic writer, right? I was the person that had written these plays with all these great sad events in them. And all the time I kept saying to people, and I want to write a musical. I want to write a musical. I said to my agents, I said to my friends, I said to everybody I know that I wanted to write a musical, and they all went, like, sure you do. Yeah, no, you don't want to write a musical. Musicals are happy. Musicals are fun. That's not who you are. I kept, right? And finally, it was Heidi Landesman, my great friend, and Heidi Ettinger, I'm sorry, Heidi Ettinger, she was Heidi Landesman then, who said to me, you know, okay, let's write the musical that you've always been wanting to write. And she knew this book, The Secret Garden, which I did not know, because of course I had read all the other girls' books, not that one. I read all the grim ones. She finally was willing. It took the trust of a friend, you know, somebody that I'd worked with. She'd done the set on Night Mother, and you know, she was somebody that she was a colleague and a pal. And she said, come on, let's write this musical. And we went sort of looking around for composers and found Lucy Simon, and, you know, kind of the rest is history. I mean, Secret Garden is, you know, I can now sort of talk about it. It's with some distance. It's a beloved piece that, you know, you hear, I mean, people write to us. It's you know, it's a great thing. I love musicals. As you said, I grew up at the piano. I played my way through college on music scholarship. I was the kid in college who was like accompanying the dance group, right? There were all the beautiful rich girls, and there I'm a scholarship kid, and I'm sitting at the piano playing Edelweiss, right? While they do their pliés, right? And that worked out. You could not have planned a better training for, you know, a person that was going to be in the theater than that, right? I didn't know I was going to end up in the theater, but there I sat every day watching the girls go do their you know, kind of narrative, interpretive dance. And sitting behind the scenes, I mean, it was perfect for me. And so that one of the things I think happens in lives and also in writing, I think, is that you in a way you sort of stoke the fire for a long time. You like get the train ready to run. You know, you just keep piling, get the fire hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, and finally one day you say, okay, release the brakes, let's go. Right? And both those parts are really important about lives and about pieces of art, that you've got to get enough fuel going and get it all hot enough so that when you actually decide to start writing your play, to start living your life as an artist, you've got enough fuel on board that you can actually get down the track.
You and I both know a lot of playwrights who just write their plays and go home. Mm-hmm. Or write their plays, go to rehearsal, get produced, go home. Mm-hmm. And you don't do that. I don't know that you ever have. Uh-huh. You're on the council. You're a very important part of the council of the Dramatists Guild. Right. You are a teacher at Juilliard. Right. You are an extraordinary advocate for so many things about dramatists and playwrights and emerging playwrights, young playwrights, or playwrights' rights, and that to me is a real artist. And I'm curious if you are torn by that stuff. Does that stuff take up too much time in your head? Or is it who you are and so you must?
Well, I think, yes. No, all of those things. I think that the work that I do on behalf of young writers is to make sure that when I'm stuck in the nursing home and they take me out to the theater, I'll have something good to go see. It's a sort of, it's kind of selfish desire. No, a little bit kidding. I feel that that I sped through the kind of young writer phase of my own life, and then I moved to New York and realized that there's this world of writers that I'm a part of where I feel really comfortable. And I like that world so much. I mean, the day that I first arrived at the Council of the Dramatists Guild, Mary Rogers, came up to me and she said, "Oh, you are going to have such a good time here. This is the best club in town." And it was that sort of Dorothy Parker-esque kind of moment of you sit around the table and there was Julie Stein and Jules Pfeiffer. And I mean, they were just this extraordinary, Betty Comden and Eve Merriam and this wonderful group of people. And I finally felt home in a way that I had never felt around my own, in my own house where I grew up, and I had never felt that way in any other part of my life. And that's as simple an explanation as there is. This is my family, the world of the theater. And I'm happy to help the old people and help the young people. And I'm in it. I'm at the table. I'm doing what I can to make it a good, safe place for us all to live. And I think that that's the thing that makes it easy to advocate for playwrights, right? And to do all the things that I do. It's also true that I don't feel that burning young playwright desire anymore in my own life. I still love doing musicals because they are so impossible, and because I love to hear people sing, and that's about my own pleasure. So I feel like my life in the world of plays at the moment is kind of passing on what I've written rather than writing them myself now. So that makes it easy too. So I don't feel stolen from in any way. I feel fed by the world of playwrights I've learned more at Juilliard than anybody that's been through the program. Sitting around the table at the Guild, I'm more inspired than I ever am when I'm walking the streets. I think these are the people that I love. I love their work. I love their courage. I love their heart. Look at Tina Howe. You look out at these people and you think, oh boy, I am so happy to be home.
Mm-hmm. You and I have talked about this on many occasions, and I'm a little crazy about this, and I think you're a little crazy about this, but just start off with a fun fact, which is last year in our regional theaters, 80% of the productions that were done were written by men, and 20% were written by women. The Broadway statistics on that are even more dismal. I don't know that there's an answer to this question. I don't even know where to even talk about this, but it is alarming. And I'm curious, where are we to go? Where do we start? Or how do we start?
When the rage is done, I don't know when that will be. Maybe we could find some answers about this. I think that the simple fact is that we are not hearing all the stories of all the people in America. And I can only talk about America because that's where I live. I think lots more, the statistics are a lot different in England, but America is particularly male in terms of its sort of dramatic view. The great ones are guys. The great stories are the ones written by men. And you could say, well, America's just kind of a male culture. I don't know that it's that simple, and I don't know that I'm the person to really talk about why it is, but the loss is staggering. What audiences are not hearing about the lives of American women and the lives and life as understood by American women? This is the great loss. This is as if we finally said, oh, let's just only write about life in the nighttime. You would think, well, that's crazy, right? Stuff happens in the day. Right? Well, this is the equivalent of what we have done. We have said, you women, be silent. we'll just hear from the men on this issue of what's the matter, what the troubles are, what the struggles are, and that's just not the case. I do think that there is a there are things that women writers could do to improve the chances of their work being done, but those things are really weird. Mel Gussow, the great critic and our friend, once told me that the plays of mine that were most successful were the ones where the women had guns. And he's right. Absolutely right. Absolutely. Couldn't be more right. So it's a thing that, what I want to plead to the regional theaters, to the producers, is, take all of those names off of the fronts of the plays and do the plays that move you, do the stories that, and stop, and let's try to get this evened up. I hope that we don't have to go toward some kind of advocacy of affirmative action, but there have to be some ways for women's views to be heard. It's taken, when those of us that are in the sort of front lines of kind of, it's Wendy and Tina and me and Wendy Kesselman, Paula Vogel, when we sort of first came on the scene and kind of announced that, oh yes, women can write plays, then, and we thought that the change would happen a lot faster than it has. I think that there is a new generation of women writing for the theater, and by really new, I mean the sort of women in the kind of 30 to 35. Those, they're not really aware that there's difficulty. We just had a great panel at the Dramatists Guild with some like Julia Cho type women, and they feel still very excited about the possibility. So it may be that we start to see a shift. We are actively, those of us in the old guard, leaning heavily on the producers at regional theaters, saying, come on, do better. You have to do better. You have to consider the fact that this is a bias, and you have to get rid of it. You have to get rid of this bias about, we'd rather do plays by men, or we're drawn to plays by men, or we think they have. One of the things that is always said by, if we could imagine some kind of cliched male artistic director of a theater, they would be saying, well, it's nice enough writing, but where's the event, right? That's the big complaint. So I say to women writers, you need to know that they are expecting an event. But it's similar to the difference between the way men and women approach sex, right? And men want the event, right? And women are like, I don't know, it's not just about the event for me. It's really about some other stuff. Right? So when men are reading plays, they're looking for the event, right? And so if all you've got is the other stuff, they close it up and go, I don't know, it's nice writing, but where's the event, right? And that's just something that's a gender difference that is so profound that it's I don't even quite know how to say how you would go about getting rid of that. Clearly, from listening to me this morning that a lot of what I think we operate out of a sort of hardwired, species-bound set of rules about what the species needs in order to continue itself on Earth, right? What does a species need? It needs the event, right? Not the other stuff, right? So I think that if women know this, and I guess it's sort of up to me to say this kind of thing. This is sex education for playwrights. That sounded like Wendy, didn't it? I'm channeling Wendy. I do think that this is really important. We can't ignore gender differences. We have to take them head on. We have to really, really look at them and say, what are the things that are disadvantageous to us about being women, and figure out how to deal with that. Some of the way to deal with that might be to say, well, okay, then my plays are only going to be done in theaters that are headed by women. Unfortunately, I know that it's the situation in America today that a lot of racism and sexism, it's so pervasive in the society that it's hard for people not to feel it, even though you are the victim of it. Do you know what I mean? It's hard for a lot of women artistic directors not to operate out of a kind of male bias about choosing plays. And those are just the facts. And I think that what we have to do is a lot of, we have to keep squawking about this. I think that, it has, and women have to keep knowing straight ahead what you're up against.
I think we'd like to turn this out to you guys and ask you if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Marcia. And if you would just kind of file back and around to the microphones, those would be welcomed.
Yes.
Hi, Marcia. My name is Brian. I'm a playwright from Boston.
Yeah.
And going back to the subject of women playwrights,
Yeah.
I'm curious if you've seen over the past, I don't know, just throw out 20 years, an increase in the number of, as you've gone to events like this, the increase in the number of women playwrights who have been, writing, attending events like this.
It's a great question. And the answer is no. It's always about half and half, men and women, just as it is in writing programs all the way across the country. It's always half and half. And yet what happens after people leave here, after people leave Juilliard, after people leave, is that the work of the men is way more likely to be done. That's just the fact. And I haven't seen any change. Women have always been dying to tell the stories that they know. One of the interesting things that I feel about this is that, no, it's interesting to me, it may not be, is that men's stories tend to be a sort of struggle that ends with a victory, right? Or somebody dies. It doesn't matter. Struggle, fight, die. Or triumph. But let's say die for the women's stories tend to start with the loss, right? As in life. What men are out like struggling and killing the antelope, and in the cave days, right? And the women, evolutionarily speaking, are cleaning the thing up and feeding it to people and trying to figure out how to deal with it once it's dead, right? And I think that what to do after a loss occurs is something that women know a lot about. It's not a real it's not an active kind of story, but it is something that we know in the center of our beings, and it is something that the planet could not exist without. We have cleaned up all the mess that the men have made since the beginning of time, right? We have not been making this mess. This killing, this savagery, this warfare, this is all done by the men for purposes that the species knows. I don't know why there's war, but I know that it's the women that have kept us here on the planet. And I think that's a gender difference that has a peculiar has peculiar resonance in the theater. One of the things that I think is a challenge to women writers is to figure out how to make these stories of the surviving of loss, how to make these stories of recovery, how to make the stories that we know more theatrical, right? That's, I think, our challenge, is not to write the stories the men know. That's not the deal. What we have to do is to tell these stories of recovery and redemption and reconnection and those stories in a way that everybody will find thrilling.
Hi, I'm Eric Zuleger. I'm from California. My question is, how do you approach musicals, like writing and collaborating on that? And secondly, how do you approach musical adaptations?
What a musical is composed of, it's a story that has moments that are beyond speech. Musicals have a series of moments that you can't talk about. You can't say them in dialogue. They have moments of emotion, moments of loss, moments of happiness, joy, silliness that are completely beyond the power of a piece of dialogue to deal with. Like, for example, if I wanted to tell you that I loved you, right? I would, in a play, I would have to say, Eric, I love you. Right? And then it would be your turn, right? And you would say whatever. But if I'm in a musical and I want to say that, I can say, oh, Eric, when I first saw you, and blah, 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 for another 10 minutes. I can sing for 10 minutes about how, and then you can join and do you know what I mean? You can fully express an emotion in a song in a way that you can't quite do in dialogue. So what you look for as you are looking at a musical, at adapting a story or creating a musical, or you look for the moments that really that are beyond words, that require song. Right? And I think that, again, I know you think I only talk about life in the caves, but I think that when we were living without language, right, we were able to call to each other across chasms of hada, hada, right? That's singing. That says, or da da da, here I am, right? Hello, come over, right? Whether that came from bird song or who knows where that came from, but I think singing is our real, actual, natural language. It's the way that we communicate with each other past words, past dialect, past everything. I mean, I think that when people sing to children, people grow up, people are babies and they live in a world of song. Whether that's and I think that's where we actually live at our fullest is in song. Oddly enough, I mean, talk is just kind of what we can do till the song comes. That's how you feel as a book writer of a musical, that you're just like, you're the string in between the pearls, and you're just like passing the time till the orchestra gets ready again. What I really like, I love singers. I like them as people, and so I find that singing gets past my defenses in a really in a powerful way. And that's a thing that I like as a tool, as an artist. I like writing a song like, "How could I know I would have to leave you?" Do you know that great song from The Secret Garden on Lucy Simon's beautiful music? I mean, you just get carried. It's a phrase that if you spoke it, you'd have to whine, or you'd have to be. How could I know that I'd have to leave you? But when you hear it sung in Secret Garden, it has this lament, it has this love, it has all this passion in it. And I think that, for me, it's a simple case of I love them and I love what they can do. I love what music can do to people.
Thanks,
So
Eric.
if you want to have the advanced course later, you have to invite me back.
My name's Hubert Grissom. I'm a playwright from Tampa, Florida. And thank you for the session earlier today on selecting our next play. I'm dying to know what you're working on, with the caveat that I know there's a cocktail party answer and a real answer for artistic directors and agents.
I have two musicals that are ready to go, so that's a good beginning of an answer. I mean, two that we've just finished up. One is a musical called Princess Caraboo, based on the same material as there was a movie called Princess Caraboo. It's about a girl who doesn't want to be a maid anymore, and so wraps a turban around her head and starts speaking a strange language that is taken as a princess. And she actually survives this act of kind of class heresy. Anyway, that's that. And then Lucy Simon and I have just finished a musical version of Wuthering Heights, which is called Heathcliff. And so that's done. That's just ready, waiting to be done. In musicals, you write them and then you wait. And unfortunately, that's where we are with those two. But there are a couple of other things that are around, sort of circulating. People come to me now and say, would you do this musical? Would you do that? One of the most interesting ideas that's around at the moment is a notion of a spectacle that we would call something like the Odyssey in the Air. So I've always been wanting to, I loved the circus always, and wanted to do something that was not on the ground. So this is the founder of Palabolas and Juilliard, the electronic music genius, who, we're sort of thinking about doing a version of the Odyssey that has flying and, like that. So that would be fun. Those things. I mean, I'm having to be pretty picky now about what I do, because musicals take a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Marcia.
Hey.
Now I'm of two minds. Do I worry more about my age or my gender? But actually, my question is I'm not about the audience, and what I see, like this split in the audiences of many plays I go to, the audience is, my age or in their 70s or older, much older audience. And then I also go to theater that's shooting for the younger audience. And I went to one a couple of weeks ago, only the plays had no words. and none of the elements that we talked about earlier. And I've thought, is this really going to get the younger audience in the plays? But I'd just like you to speak to that, maybe about the audience.
You know, you can't ever quite tell what a young audience is going to be drawn to. For example, Spring Awakening, which is currently running on Broadway, you would think there would be a young audience there like crazy. That's not where they are. You know, that it's hard to know what young audience will like. This is a crusade of mine, this sort of getting young people to the theater. But I think that the theaters need to find ways to just keep the doors open and make it really cheap for young people to come. You know, I think the big problem about young audiences is the tickets are too expensive. It's a really simple problem. It doesn't matter whether the characters speak any words or whether they're, you know what, yeah, schools, you know, the best thing in the world that we could do for, you know, for young people, in my view, is just have them come to the theater all the time. Make any seat available that isn't sold by 7:30. Anybody can have that that's got a student ID and $20. That's a good idea in New York. You know, it's probably $5 out in the regional theaters. And filling up those. So I think that if something is, the theater is a very compelling form, and a lot of people, I mean, kids don't want to just, at least, you know, my kids don't, and they're teenagers. They don't want to sit at home and blog all night. That's not what they're doing. They want to be out addressing the issues of their time and listening to people perform, and they want to be moved. You know, they want to be shaken up. So I think always the theaters had room for everybody. And I think that if we could just make it cheaper for everybody, then we'd be set.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Callie Kimball, and I'm a playwright right here in Washington, D.C. And back to the issue of women in theater. The first play I wrote, it had a woman protagonist, and it was reviewed well, but one of the first reviews was somewhat diminishing in that it did that thing where, oh, well, the women in the audience especially seemed to enjoy it. And it was sort of like an undercutting, like a diminishing thing. And I think looking at the historical context of how women have been socialized to communicate and express themselves, I mean, I think we're all known as like we're great talkers and communicators and very emotionally connected. But there's something about putting those characters on stage that I don't know if it's just not always box office smart for a theater to go there. It's considered a woman's play. And I know like the characters that I write often sort of approach things obliquely. When you think of, and you know, we're learning in these sessions to, you know, state what's going on right at the top of the scene and say what you want. I don't know very many women in real life who do that. So if we're trying to kind of, you know, I guess my question is, do we need to educate not just the artistic directors or the literary managers, but also, I mean, do there need to be more symposia on female playwrights and how to specifically address this issue? Because I think it's been acknowledged for a long time that it is an issue, but, you know, what can we do? And I don't know if that's an answerable question right now, but it's something I'd be really interested in having specific seminars on what do we want to see on stage for women. You know, we don't want to see any more prostitutes or revengeful wives. But how do we, what's our model? What do we want to model for future female playwrights?
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like we have to have some new tactics and some new strategies for dealing with this. As I said, you know, the kind of old guard, Wendy Wasserstein, Tina, and me, you know, that we Gretchen, we really thought that it would be enough to exist. And then the people would do our work because there we were and we were good. That doesn't turn out to be the case. So what the new strategies are, I don't know. At the moment, I feel like sometimes I should just go around and say, okay, here's some things that would work. And really kind of killer ideas, you know? I mean, by killer, I mean like dangerous ideas. Like, okay, just write your next play under a man's name. That's one idea. I'm not advocating this, I'm saying these are the things I think about. I think about, well, okay, I can pretty much tell you what to put in the play, like the bit about the gun, to make it seem more event-driven, shall we say? But then that I'm shaping plays that I don't have any business shaping. I don't have any business telling you what to put in your play so that it will get done. I could tell you that, but what I want to be able to do is go and revise like who's sitting at the critical tables of the magazines and newspapers in America. Those people have to get rid of their bias. They've got it really bad. And we have to alert and sort of evangelize in the regional theaters and say, you know, it's not enough to do 20% plays by women. That's not good enough. And it's not good enough to do, you know, one play by an Asian person every 5 years. And it's not good enough to do, you know, you need to tell the stories that represent America as you see it today, not as it was in the past. If people want to go to the classic American theater, they can go there. But the regional theaters should reflect who's in their audience. And the more they do that, the more that audience will be there. It's like with Color Purple, right? I mean, people said to us, you can't write a play, you know, you can't do a musical of Color Purple, nobody will come. Hello, you know, I mean, you know, 1.5 million people, you know, I mean, we have people every night, 17,000 people a night go to see The Color Purple in New York, and the same number in Chicago, right? And people so overjoyed to see this story told to them in their language. And that, I think that, you know, it's just a longer road than we thought. There's a lot more in the way. But I also think that people have to be a lot more, and by that I mean people like me, have to be a lot more active and verbal and furious about saying things. Like when we opened in Chicago, The Color Purple in Chicago, I did an interview with the Chicago Tribune guy who was going to review the play. Right, he was going to review the musical. He reviewed it in Atlanta. He reviewed it in New York. And he asked me what I thought of the, you know, critical sort of failure of Color Purple in the eyes of the critics. Like, well, you know, it was to say that it was a mixed, the reviews were mixed, would be generous, right? Basically, anyway. And I said to him that I felt like the reviews for Color Purple in New York, I mean, I said this to the critic for the Tribune, right? Like, okay, I'm telling you, those reviews were white, male, sexist bias, right? And that was not a critical failure of the play. It was a failure of the critics to understand who lived in this world with them. And it was a sort of blind, deaf, dumb view of what was entertaining, what stories were worth telling. Well, okay, I called the producer when I got off the phone from that interview, and I said, oh, no, you know what I've done? I just told the Chicago Trib guy that, you know, what I thought of the reviews of The Color Purple. And what happened was we got the best reviews in Chicago that I've ever gotten in my life. Now, I don't want to take credit for it. Because the production, I wasn't up there singing, right? It's a glorious production. But I just feel like we have to get unafraid about saying, you know what this is? This is sexist bias. Stop that. And it's almost, you know, we can't get lulled into the kind of magical thinking of, well, maybe if we're just really good enough, they'll do our plays. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We can't be in the magical thinking world. And it's a someday when you ask me back, we'll talk about magical thinking, because it's this big problem for writers, especially playwrights. If only I turn around 3 times and you know, it's this. We all really spend a lot of time hoping the magic will hit us. And I think with the situation for women and women writing plays, the time for the magic is done. You know, there's no rabbit in the hat. So just, you know, start doing something else. I appreciate your question. I mean, if you, whatever you can do that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi,
Hey.
my name is Ella Kalish, and I'm a playwright from Miami Beach, and this is to the issue of women in the theater. I grew up in the late 60s and 70s to young adulthood, at a time when the women's movement really drove a unified voice
Right.
of women that weren't even in the arts, and together we made a real difference in how we ranked in business and in the arts themselves. And I noticed that around the 80s and 90s, all of a sudden, the women's movement seemed to be a problem solved. It seemed to sort of go unsaid that it was solved, but it no longer was in the media anymore. And so how do you get that voice, that unified voice of women that are going to make a difference and be heard, so that you're not singularly or along with a small group trying to get us to be taken seriously?
And I wish I knew. I mean, I'm serious. Gloria Steinem has just written a piece for that I can send to Gary, and he can get it to all of you. She's responding to a guy on an airplane. I won't be able to do her justice, but you'll get the idea that she's of this anger too, and the anger is building back up again, I guess. She says she was on an airplane where everybody got to vote about what movie they wanted to see. And everybody voted, and then this one guy said, I don't want to see that movie. That's chick lit, right? And so she proceeds to talk about this idea of chick flicks and chick movies and chick literature and chick all that. And she's proposing that, get ready, she proposes that there be this new classification of literature which would be called prick lit, right? And it would involve movies that glorified World War II, and it would involve, various stories and obviously you have to read this piece, I'll send it to you, but clearly if Gloria has arrived at this point, we're at a place where everybody says we didn't solve this, it's not okay. We didn't get, like I said, the road is longer than we thought. We cannot slip back into a silence. America run by men is clearly a disaster, given the way that it looks at this moment. If you let the men decide, what do? We go around the earth killing people. This is not right. And so as women, we have just have to, I don't know, we have to keep being men, I guess. I don't know. I wish I knew. It's a thing that I so appreciate Gary bringing up and caring about, because it isn't just it's not a strict gender line. And I think that people that are aware that there are people who are in a state of silence, then these are the people that we salute and love, and we all link arms and try to move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, Marcia. My name is Gabrielle Orca. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, a recent graduate from Boston University. I have two questions, but I think they're very connected, so you can choose to answer one or both. My first question is, you've received many accolades and professional success from your first play, Getting Out, and I would just like to know what it was like for you the morning after. What was it like getting back to your computer or typewriter and continuing onwards and writing your next string of plays? And my second question is, in a previous session with Gary, he mentioned to start from writing what you love. And just now I heard you say, tell the story that only you can tell. And those mantras resonate really deeply with me. And my question to you is how to reconcile those two mantras with audience expectations and the current theater aesthetic.
Clearly, you don't want to give your time to something that you don't love, right? So Gary is absolutely right. It's the thing that you love, the thing you're trying to save, the thing you're afraid of losing. This is how it all connects to what you're afraid of losing, right? Right, the thing that you love so much that the thought of losing it puts you in the pain that you can't begin to communicate in any other way except writing a play, right? That's how those ideas connect, right? And then what you do once you know that you have a subject that has in it something that you love, that you fear is threatened, that you sense is in danger, when there's something at stake for this person that you love or this idea that you love, when there's a big stake, then, well, you know what? It's like you go to your kid, you have a fabulous tomato that somebody gave you. Now you figure out how you make that into something that you can actually eat, right? Which is where the audience comes in. It's okay. You get this great, gorgeous heirloom tomato. You don't just go and put it in the middle of the table and say, come on, everybody. You know, you figure out, okay, what are my choices? Am I going to slice it in the mozzarella, or am I going to put with the, what do I do with this fabulous content that I have? This tomato, right? This wonderful thing that I love that I don't want to see harmed. And then that's when the craft issues, like we were talking about today, those issues come into play. Knowing what the audience expects, those things come in. Knowing what the critical climate is, knowing, you know, who's likely to do this play about this. I mean, one of the big questions for young writers, I think, is, you know, only send your plays to the people that you know already do plays like this. Do you know what I mean? And this is the other thing about, you can pre-select your audience in a really powerful way. And you can make craft decisions and you can make content decisions, and these are two separate things. And you can't get by with just one of them. You can't go, you know, you can't live as a human, full human, without your head and your heart, right? You can't write a play out of just craft, and you can't write a play out of just love. You can't. You have to have both of them. So I think that's what makes it fabulous to be a playwright. Because it's a very complex, very compelling, very difficult, thrilling thing to do. And the people who do it are the best people in the world. I would rather talk to playwrights than anybody that I know. And that, you know, this means it's good for us. We keep doing it, we keep talking, and we keep making the plays that the world needs to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you all join me, please, in thanking Marcia for being with us today?